So good morning and welcome to the second of our Future of Aviation panels. We had a really interesting event last night. Thank you all for coming. So my name's Nick Hilton. I guess I'll be moderating today's session, which brings together panelists from Airbus, from Easyjet, from Bristol Airport and from Wood. In a minute, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about where their businesses fit into the whole decarbonisation agenda, which is really what we're here to talk about today. But in terms of sort of context, I guess in recent days and weeks, we've heard a huge amount from panelists across COP and within Wood House about the importance of collaboration. And really, that's why we're here today. That's specifically why this group has got together on this stage. It's to do to a collaboration and a partnership that we've all committed to and that we're all working very hard on. So on the slide behind you, you can see the Southwest Hydrogen Ecosystem, as we're calling it. And it's planned to be a transport-led cluster in the Southwest. And it really seeks to draw together many of the sort of primary players operating in that area, geographical area that is. Now, I'm not going to really dwell too much on the detail of this, but I guess what I wanted to say was this was sort of born out of an initial conversation between, I think, Simon and myself. Where Simon was emphasising how much the Bristol Airport are doing in terms of decarbonisation, and I guess some of the limitations that are faced by airports in delivering the whole of the agenda. And I guess Simon's challenge to us initially was, that's great, you guys, you're consultants, you do some nice work for us, you do our planning, you do our carbon action plans, but what else is there out there? We want you to do some really innovative thinking, and asking the question of what's the game changers from them. So we started to sketch out this idea. People like Dave Eccles very kindly came on board, and in a very short space of time, by talking to partners, by, if you like to use the cliche, getting together a coalition of the willing, this idea has started to move forward into something tangible. So I guess really for today, it's talking about the partnerships that we've got. We've brought on board players you can see on the stage. We've talked to Rolls-Royce, EDF, Wales and West Utilities, and certainly it's starting to gain some real momentum. So what's my point? Why am I rambling on about Southwest ecosystem no one's yet heard of? Well, I guess from my perspective, we all have something in a tendency to work in our sector boxes, and yet to deliver net zero, you can't work in those sectors. You can't work in the same ways in which we used to work. Collaboration, cross-sector cooperation really is the only way we're going to deliver against this challenge. So I guess to finish up here, it's been much said that COP, the events that sit around it, are a huge opportunity to bring great minds together. We're going to see sort of multiple industries going through this transition together, more so than in aviation. So this panel really starts to bring those some of those minds together, talk to you about their vision for the future. So I'll start with that and ask David to kick us off with a little bit about Easyjet and their future vision.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nick. So hi, everybody. My name is David Morgan. I'm the Director of Flight Operations for Easyjet. I'm a commercial pilot as well as trade as well as my day job of future might hold in terms of technology change over to non-propulsion Easyjet. In terms of what Easyjet are doing, decarbonisation pathway, the question is quite timely. Just yesterday, we announced Race to Zero. Race to Zero is an important membership, if you like, to the 50 trajectory. So, and more importantly, that trajectory must be science-based trajectory, and that's often challenging. I think that over the past couple of years, a lot of organisations made great claims in terms of better instead actually maximum you actually do that? So I think we're at a time where sort of the rhetoric is coming to an end, and the devil is in the detail, as the phrase is last weeks. Rubber is hitting the road, and all of the other phrases that have been coming out. This is where it happens. So we're really delighted that we kind of make the ground where we are publishing. And so what is it going to consist of? Well, as I'm sure you all know, fuel at the moment, and very place with battery or anything else. So it will rely on a combination of measures. Near term, things like aircraft that have an Easyjet are 15%. Flying an airspace which was designed in the 1950s. Okay. System designed for that, not just for that, but as well. Powerful, shallow, quickly. And so there's a good sort of investment. Operational efficiencies, things like understanding and using big data better, like hundreds of data points every second, like understanding how to use that data. There's sustainable aviation. Here, during and that's going to be an important part of our trajectory. In Easyjet, we see that as an interim solution. There are some for some airlines that is more than an interim solution, and we absolutely recognise that. Big game changer for us will become the second part of that 50 roadmap to zero emission. So all of those levers are going to be any residual emissions right now. So today, setting emissions. We recognise that's not part of the trajectory. Something so that's kind of our decarbonisation roadmap in a nutshell. It requires a huge amount of collaboration. I think we'll come on to that so much.
Thanks. So I'm Jay Williams. I work in Airbus Fuel Systems Integration Department, trade. I just want to start by saying a few words about the culture of Airbus. Why we're here today. For 2 years now, we've had a revised purpose broadcast widely for our company around pioneering sustainable aviation. I think I've seen that change in the last couple of years to really focus on so that started with us for the elephant in the room really was the scope 3 emissions of all of our products and service. The 10,000 aircraft or so are emitting carbon today. And so it's important for us to size that elephant, get it out in the daylight, and actually now we're disclosing our scope 3 emissions that enables us to talk with confidence and commitment about what we're going to do to address that going forwards. So I will, given the chance, talk to you about the technology and the product aspect of how we want to use Airbus products to get there, and then of course going through the collaboration that must happen for this big change in industry, especially for the SAF fuels, and looking forward to hydrogen.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks, Jenny. I'm Simon Earls. I'm Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Airport. For those not from the UK, Bristol Airport's a regional airport southwest of England. Pre-pandemic, we welcomed about 9 million passengers through our facility, and we're located about 7 city of Bristol itself, in the heart of the southwest. We started our climate change journey back in 2014 when we as an airport joined the carbon accreditation program that's run by Airport Council. International airports have got have a really helpful framework that was developed by ACI some years ago, and that's helped us for a number of years now to understand our carbon emissions and put in place actions to that with some great success. Since between 2014 and 2019, our scope 1 and 2 emissions have reduced in just under 15% in good terms and over 40% on a passenger basis during a period where we had very significant growth in coming to the airport. But like many airports, scope 1 and 2 is only a tiny part of our footprint, just 1%. So 91% is industry-free spots, with 79% of that being flights and 20% of that being journeys to and from the airport. So in 2019, we published a new carbon roadmap setting out a new set of targets for us as a business. So we'll set ourselves a target of being carbon neutral by the end of this year, and we'll do that with by purchasing offsets for digital emissions. We've committed to the industry target of net zero 2050. We were proud to be a signatory to the Sustainable Aviation Plan back in 2015. And we've now set ourselves a target of net zero for our emissions by 2030. So moving away from let's assume that realistically can. So really exciting time for the industry. Really pleased to take part in this debate, and there's lots we're doing with some of the partners on the panel, but I'm sure that will come.
So I'm Dan Carter. My role within Wood is really focused on how we support our customers with their decarbonisation journeys and how we bring together all the skill sets we've got within our business to support that journey and make sure it's realised. So when it comes to the aviation sector in particular, you might think, well, what do we do within Wood? And the answer is actually quite a lot. So we're heavily involved in master planning, early solution phase development, but also looking at technology commercialisation, so supporting the development of technologies that take us into the future. Whether that's for ground-based support in terms of new energies, ground fleets within the ocean, or whether that's supporting the development of the overall master plans themselves. We see hydrogen as a significant part of the future. Both hydrogen and SAF hydrogen. So we actually partnered with Honeywell to develop a combined sustainable aviation solution that partners with technology is eco-technology. But what happens there is the byproducts from the biofuels process being used to generate hydrogen, providing relatively carbon neutral product. If you can combine carbon capture with that as well, you can be completely neutral, maybe even carbon negative. So that's really where we sit at the moment: master planning, technology development. We'll come to your
Simon, as an airport, my mind off the front line, make planning in a way that not everybody has to. So, in your view, what are the aspects of change, social license,
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And you're right. I mean, you can't see the scars. I bet do some of your colleagues finding a real and public inquiry with regards to fairly modest capacity for the answers. So in terms of social value, I would start by saying that, yeah, the reason why I came into aviation 20 plus years ago was I believe it's wonderful, it's for good, and what it was driven in terms of connectivity, vitally important. Whilst it was the planning process is challenging, right? The airports often find themselves having to justify that full sprint that I mentioned. The rigor is important. Is place and planning system the way it's I think in terms of the kind of wider social points, I suppose we shouldn't forget that in 2019, 9 million people came through Bristol Airport, and we shouldn't forget that the whole ecosystem. Consumers are the travel on, and we don't necessarily see any evidence of that change materially. I think in terms of building that social conversation around value, I think the key thing is transparency of consumers, and that's something we've done in our partnership with Easyjet, starting to engage with our passengers in terms of what they're doing so that they can understand the active steps that both the airport and the airline are taking to reduce the emissions that effectively comes about as a result of their actions. So for me, transparency is key, and having that conversation with the consumer.
And David, to go to you, do you see a difference in consumer behaviour, expectations?
Absolutely. I mean, passengers want to fly. Let's be really clear about it. We're in a generation now where travelling massive. So there is side right. So it's really a question about making the right investment choices, collaboration. That's the issue. Carbon. We are very proud to be an airline. These decades, and plan our efforts to become not that is absolutely
Thank you. I guess questions yesterday, sustainable aviation. Times in order of costs, and that's something that's going to be passed on to you.
would be happy with it. Cost is a really big issue. I think really important is that we can't have a situation where so cannot have a situation where the airline perhaps is operating at a loss in an airport because a competitor has decided to do nothing I pay. So it must have a regulatory framework. This doesn't and when it comes to the short-term time, must be
Just to pick up on that as well, Nick, I mean, the cost is really driven by the level of maturity of the technology, the way that technology is developed and the scale. And I think so. The point really is that policy framework, that legislation needs to exist to encourage the investment and development of SAF at that scale that starts to bring down that overall cost to both the airlines and consumers.
That strikes me that something has to be done at the international level. I mean, I know legislation is something that we see happening at an international level. Are we going to create that so we can operate SAF or a hydrogen plane from Lima?
really difficult one. Frankly, I think it's going to be done. Make some progress. But disadvantage compared to restrictions. But there will be a don't overestimate the
You have a question there.
Alan Robinson, Smartports Energy, or Paradigm 5. We went this route, back in 2010, 2012 with the EU ETS, and they embraced it. And then, but do you see Corsair is doing that, or is it a universal carbon tax to create this level playing field where you can actually operate parity with other people? I mean, that was the American side, was they were going to pay tax to Europe, flights that were coming out of the US. Talking about flights out of Peru, disadvantaged Europe.
I think there will be an element of that through Corsair, and I think market-based measures will be introduced at various degrees. I think SAF mandates will this that would be something that actually, looking further ahead, you're better off incentivizing regulatory charges, navigation charges, to a zero, like those direction. You only use the sort of stick principle. It doesn't bring people along with the technology. So we're very much in favour of a framework which incentivizes good behavior.
Interesting.
I think I might come back to regulation later. SAF is actually a lot of technology covered. If you could talk us through the effect of that.
Very quickly, just to echo starting quickly with the self already You might have seen most recently a fellow fly demonstrations. Let's say we're in cruise, you could have a lead aircraft generating a initial weight for the following aircraft. Again, that's another means to look at emissions reduction. The migrating piece, looking at a similar way. So that's something that's ongoing. And ground ops, civil engine taxi, the product we have truly. If you talk about the fuel aspects, SAF and hydrogen, that's in Bristol and Hilton. Talk about the Southwest network. But in terms of what's achievable, it's available today, perspective. On SAF today, we can blend up to 50%. What we're trying to do at Airbus is to look at the next step. So in doing that, we're looking to install the higher specification of sustainable fuels today. Today we're limited by Jet A1's specification of fuel types, and we're exploring if could there be a wider possibility of fuel development pathways or conventions to the market if we were to expand the ability limits for that fuel specification to open up the simpler molecules in terms of lower aromatics, lower sulfur content. You might have seen successful flight tests recently, the Eclipse program on A350, where we're looking at the climate impact directly of SAF versus kerosene. Speak to SAF for some interesting footage around the Falcon aircraft, Top Gun style, following the emission trail of some aircraft. And also wider for 350 was with Rolls-Royce, but also expanding to the 320 family now with our Vulcan flight testing, which again bring new entrants like CFM. So interest there in terms of SAF isn't only what's achievable to up the uptake of CO2 impact, but a contra particulate matter, CO2 effects. So for us, still more to do to open things to really allow the collaboration to. For us, the technical work that means, the fuel system level, the power changes in density, in energy content, in viscosity. So while subtle differences, imagine as an industry over 100 years of kerosene-based fuel, a lot of activity. In terms of our commitment, that looks like a wider capacity in the frame 2025 to 2030. Is that true? Yes, generating staff use it. I don't think that's hydrogen. Far from it. I think in terms of product compatibility, that can be thought of as a position. That's not the case. Airbus view hydrogen, starting with a smaller aircraft for hydrogen top product size. The main long range large aircraft so synthetic or sustainable hydrogen generation, hydrogen emission. I think we need both in the mix, industry effort, but also the product. That's great. I'll come back. Yeah. I think like Dan, the enablers that hydrogen. I think the key there is exactly as we've
very narrow in terms of properties. It's effectively the opportunity to open attractive fuels, anything from hydrogen through to domestic waste. Those routes at the moment opposite projects from standardized fuel distributors interested in SAF through biorefinery facilities and the adoption of technology. Ultimately, it's those large fuel producers that already have the value chain. They have the distribution, they have the terminals, they have the refinery facilities. They are probably going to provide the bulk of SAF in the future, but the downstream industry is quite conservative as well. So we see pioneers like the North 66 in the States, ENR, Venice and Jada in Milan converting those refineries to produce biophase products. But we need to do more to incentivize that industry to adopt these new.
Just to add to that, I think as we see new entrants coming, the opportunity for further collaboration in terms of our involvement with an OEM into the ASTM process for controlling and standardizing specifications of that, and knowing what could actually be potential for issues in terms of compatibility with the power of the airplane, but actually, importantly, the climate effect thereafter. So some of the research that we do, like we need to relay that information and knowing that the time for the SAF industry has some time, but sooner we do.
Sure, in that process, we're actually focusing on the decarbonisation of the whole value chain and not just the consumption of fuel, right? With CO2 elsewhere, obviously negates the benefit of reducing CO2 emissions in flight.
Maybe just to spice up the conversation a little on SAF as a long-term solution. I think if you project yourself far enough ahead, particularly if you feel the impact of climate on them personally, part of the world, as time goes on, hard to imagine society perhaps in any form. But I think we all do. Ultimately, zero emissions flight. That is absolutely.
So can I just go to okay, go ahead.
Just to say a word on that, I know we talk about SAF as an interim solution or a transition tool, but again, in order to create that investment, there needs to be a lifetime for that product, and what the turnover is measured in decades, not in years. So we're probably talking about a solution that's going to be in place through 2050s and 2060s before we start to see future propulsion systems making up the majority of our.
Disagree with that. Off my head, you have a vision of the future, perhaps.
These land planes.
Yeah, I mean, some really interesting challenges for the airports, both in that transition phase, which is kind of long, and how it's a big question. So, you need to understand hydrogen. What does that mean? Get to handle that in a regulated environment. You need to prepare for a massive scaling up of EV and electric. We might come back to that, as well as a number of years where the existing technologies are going to be used. It's quite complicated from the airport who's hosting our family of airlines. So we're delighted that organisations like ATI were part of the Zero program, the program, coming through are starting to turn their attention to infrastructure, the ground. It's going to take quite bigger announcement and ensuring that we've got it to enable the early adopters to use the airport. That's something we're really focused on, and it's why we've taken the decision to pass it up as a test bed or in lab for various projects. With one great example of that, the low emissions turnaround trial with Easyjet at the moment, where systematically led by Sam in the audience from Easyjet and colleagues across the value chain, identified a kit on Easyjet turnaround. Can't take that out basically with a zero emission alternative, and 97% of CO2 taken out of that trial, and we hope that learning will come out of that, not only for Easyjet to roll out across their network, so to add a small CO2 benefit, you end up with something very big, and not only that, but industry learning that other partners that can pick up and roll out too. Just another perspective on fuel. So we're about to buy some biodiesel for our fleet. The government removed the incentives around red diesel recently, which was the trigger for us to that saved us about 900 tons of CO2 emissions next year. But crucially, it'll give us time. The reason we are using that as a transitionary because on some of the kit that operates at airports, fire trucks, for example, there isn't a zero emissions alternative at the moment, and others there is a choice around electric and hydrogen. What it does is it gives us some time to figure out which is the right route for us. We have a partnership with Cobus at the moment where we're trialing a large airside electric vehicle on a truck, but may there be a hydrogen option that's coming out. So it just gives us a bit of breathing space to make the right informed decisions about the structure that we need to support our customers and their decarbonisation journey. You and I have spoken briefly about millionaires. I wonder
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, the CAA created innovation centers, just looking specifically at technology in the future need and how we're going to regulate that. And so they're already kind of thing. And we start using hydrogen at airport as soon as we put right to safety regulation hydrogen near hydrogen. So we need to start bodying the I might just, for those perhaps wondering why hydrogen battery simplest take off as far as about Dubai. You take that same aeroplane like, interestingly, you manage to so energy density is E plus power. Go out see battery. just yeah. Conversation.
That was a lovely analogy about the way that the distance that we can fly. Before I go to you, Dan, I just wanted to just bring back to Simon for a moment. I know that you are looking at some eVTOL trialing, and I wonder how that's going, where the future sits from that perspective on that piece.
Yeah, so we've participated in a consortium under the government's Future Flight program, very much desktop at the moment, but bids have just gone in for the next round, which we're hopeful and optimistic the Bristol bid will be successful. We'll be able to progress things further from desktop to ultimately a live trials taking place in only 3-4 years time. So you know it's now technology. The regulation needs to be figured out, but that is for Bristol Airport at least, that's connectivity, local and regional connectivity to the airport. You know, it's a complementary mode to our colleagues at Easyjet and others that provide the the national and international connectivity. So again, part of the solution, and that's why we're so keen to be part of it. But it can only complement the services that others.
I'm wondering, you may not be here in terms of study at this stage, but who are the users for this? I grew up near Milton Keynes. When they conceived of Milton Keynes, they bought lots and lots of helipads. Everybody was going to be flying around in helipads and landing in their gardens, and that was the future of travel. So who's going to use the theoretical takeoff and landing pads today?
Well, I mean, it's probably a question for the companies that are involved in that. But what I would say is there is an enormous amount of money, investment money going into the sector at the moment. I think across the channel in Paris, I think that there's a very significant international event that's seen as an opportunity to showcase this technology. So I think the view is the demand is there. It's definitely regional and regional domestic flight. Ultimately, who chooses that mode come down to the price point.
I'm just going to add a couple of observations from the Airbus side in terms of eVTOL. Hannah demonstrated the EV placement for large aircraft was very evident. He described the advantages, and we've learned that that's demonstrated. But not to say that those things won't have a place. So there will be a place for all of that increase the electrification of the aircraft. Just to go back to the main power source, it's propulsion. Really, the hydrogen the ambition is huge because of the challenges. Just to again talk about compatibility, hydrogen density. Proposed 3 concept aircraft today. Vehicle to stand and all of those stand. That's a cryogenic tank that and that has a giant pressure management system. But the reason for that is that a gas system tank you fly around and after that is hydrogen. The handling of such liquid, the policy, etc. It's again another reason to have very lots of handling airside hydrogen our test facility in the UK. A system for flight demonstrations later this decade. So it is very compatible with the ambition for local hydrogen hub usage, because we all have a need, even today, in that growing load that we're doing to that product.
Yeah, I know your points again. Just to respond to that, I mean, I think that local perspective there in the Southwest long had this ambition. There is making have centre of excellence. I guess the announcement is great and behind Dan,
Just going to add to that, I would say these types of projects are need to make advances, particularly around hydrogen storage, hydrogen systems, capture fuel cells to reduce the weight across the way we do that, we actually start service, understand how to make stuff better, how to improve upon them. The other thing we need to do during the project is engage with stakeholders. Safety is obviously key. Google for a disaster, you can make the obvious pictures on the internet. So there's a massive public stakeholder management campaign to understand that the right safety system
Proud of the challenge to the aerospace industry. When we're talking about the size of it, submarine day, which is great. But side aircraft, narrow body size. And although you could fly Amsterdam 8-seater aircraft, the very good reason why you don't see that happen is the scale. So really encourage bold ambitions as possible in our
invitation to come in on that. The aerospace industry is very incremental solutions. We have control safety, but the ambition that we've shown to announce publicly the 2035 index of candidate aircraft, which includes up to 200 passengers, 2,000 nautical miles, exactly to attack that model, because that's where the mission priority is, and happens to be the technological start point to decide for long aircraft is the target to the market fuel mission flight. So that is the ambition. That is the challenge to pitch for that in the first instance.
that's great. I mean, personally, just want to cover 5-day segues us quite nicely to that. Talk about offset. I think connecting with ideas around regulation is great. Yeah, move on this, and that's great to hear. Our careers come our missions. Well, Mike J, what's it?
So for Airbus, some of our seeing the challenge that's ahead of us, there is a time think Airbus views that, yes, of course, there has to be this complexity around the regulatory framework, incentivizing technology. There has to be.
Yeah, I mean, offsets are a bad rap in many ways. And you kind of, it's a bit of a love or hate them. Offsetting is just pushing a problem down the road. And I think, you know, you have to be clear what your goal of offsetting is. And it should not be forming carbonization part of this. No, but offsetting is a very credible way, and these are not some sort of fictitious projects that don't exist somewhere. Credible offsetting using are genuine climate areas in parts of the world, and something that no at the moment. So what can we do? Right? Well, we can offset emissions from flights as we do for we don't ask them to do anything, as I mentioned before. It's just done, and we would encourage all airlines actually to offset their emissions while they are on their trajectory for a
But just to say, I mean, we do purchase some offsets in tiny numbers compared to some of the methods, but we are considering that as an approach, and whether that's an appropriate time we make the switch for investing that money to help accelerate our transition and our decarbonisation program. It's a bit today, but that is something that we're seriously considering. You know, can we have a greater impact with that those funds in accelerating the transition? I think United Airlines yesterday that's their take. But, we definitely see right now there's a role for them, and David mentioned his customers. I think it is one we're going to have a conversation with our customers. The role that they play.
Dan, you just wondering, I guess, direct air capture touched on various ways. Where do you see this?
So I guess to start off by saying that I'm not a huge fan of training schools. So setting has a place after you've taken direct action to your emissions or support development that I was talking about. Sometimes I think transparency is the issue. Direct investment evaluating climate solutions doing it through main basis. Easily auditable, transparent, easy for the consumer to understand.
Very last comment. I think something we found hugely frustrating is just the lack of opportunity in the UK or even within Europe. So I think a huge amount of work needs to be done to make those opportunities available. Nature solutions in the UK, the assets there, and it's a market that hasn't established itself. Fantastic to see a change there.
Yeah. Okay. It's going an hour-ish, I think, so I'm trying to take it to the audience. Is there any questions from you guys? One right at the back there. We'll start at the back.
Hi, Alistair here. So we've been talking about hydrogen five and still after touched on the scalability of SAF. I just wanted to understand this from your perspective. Is the intention for staff to across the entire and how so if the entire space is that possible? What challenges would that have? It's not. Feel free to say it's a naive question and sit back.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Um, okay, so there are definitely challenges with quantities of SAF that can be available today, and even looking forward, the quantities of SAF that can come from feedstocks that don't compete with, say, the food value chain or contribute to deforestation. So those are really concerns. And in order to address those concerns, it comes back to technology development. The technology development to open up new routes for processing products primarily based on waste or natural solutions that grow really, really quickly. Grass, eucalyptus are some of those being considered. But again, back to the earlier question, we need some incentives in terms of investment and the policy to encourage the development of technologies and the adoption of those technologies to produce that fuel. So 100% SAF future may be attainable. Challenges around technology, feedstock, and also the specifications, as we touched on earlier.
Just to say again that the ambition that we have is to clear that compatibility issue for the wider specification as soon as we can, so that there is a trigger and there's no excuse in terms of the compatibility aspect to enable and unblock that. Really, the challenge I see is to trying to then fill the demand that generates.
I guess the good news there is, though, that we've got a lot of downstream assets globally that as people start to phase out petrol and diesel consumption in other forms of transport, they're going to have to do something with it to develop their future business model. SAF is a key component of that future business model for all of the refiners we're speaking to.
That's what you touched on yesterday in terms of
repurposing oil refineries to process bio-based feedstocks, putting in place the technologies to produce the SAF Jet A1 compatible today, but also the SAF of the future, which might be a spec. I think one thing that cropped up yesterday as well, that I think it's also important to touch on, is SAF isn't too different from the Jet A1 that we derive from crude oil today. They're all carbon molecules. Those carbon molecules are processed in a way to meet the specification. So, from that stakeholder management perspective, there is no difference essentially between SAF and Jet A1 from crude oil. Just get to that back today. Crude oil.
very, very different from another place. When you think,
It's around the second question about the penetration of hydrogen. Chances of focus on the that's not discussion yet. That is that research.
Rich, I think, do you still have your hand up, or was your question?
Jay, thanks very much. Interesting chat. Jay, you mentioned we live in aviation, safety. I just wanted to play back to your sandbox with CNA regulations, certifications, licenses. I think it's a perception, certainly for me at the moment, and I don't, I honestly don't know how to that the regulators be dragged by technology at the moment, focusing on evolving the technology. Are the regulators looking at now how practically their aviation officers, their inspectors manage the transition? We're going to have power sources on aerodromes. What's the assurance for you in the cockpit and for you, Simon, as an airport? What do you think about that kind of regulatory system?
I think, a few years ago, you'd have asked the CAA to come and have a look at hydrogen use on airside. No, 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 no. They're a long way change from that. Very forward thinking in terms of need to be. Those people are chomping at the bit actually to start looking at regulation. They're not going in there saying this is the regulation that you can't do it. They're saying what do you need to do? Regulation. And let's be clear on safety. Aviation is safety regulated industry, but any safety. Also going to the future with a ramp of hydrogen, batteries, and so on. All those safety regulations. Yes. Quite quickly because to actually get stuff in service so that people get used to handling it and it's not suddenly some terrible fuel that's in 10-15 years from now.
Just a couple of words around the collaborative research landscape that's ongoing for hydrogen for Airbus. Clearly, the technology development needs to be equally paced by the regulatory environment and understanding that certification framework. So, for example, in the UK, the ZEST programme does work to look at the read across from the light aircraft into the bigger aircraft, and already working with EASA and CAA. That's going to work. Absolutely like things.
I can't stress enough. It's also interesting. Obviously, we're in a heavily regulated, very big, but making starting small. By the trials of Easyjet, and the next step of that is to get hydrogen is important, so we can all start getting used to handling that. Who's a regulator do so. We're patient. Word, but doing that is help make
curiosity makes us actually because we're still
need some outside how we might look at what's coming to mix with talking about how energy build up another. I mean, just and work we're doing on stations taking place. I never imagined having and do, but it's absolutely critical. Trying to get how do we make but after that position, it brings in a whole different players and a whole different source of ideas, so that things can come across them.
But when it comes to hydrogen in our sector, it's not going to do it alone for sure, because of the questions that we answer.
Pricing is the key word. I really have been blown away with just how interesting this whole concept.
Thank you very much. Agnes Walker from your firm, BBB, are not technically would find it fascinating. So I've got a more general question for you. Given that 2050 is not very far away, go backwards. 1992 is the same distance from now backwards. I think discussed as I went last night, but traditional competitors are going to operate. But you're all sort of different parts of it. Do you agree that you're going to operate with your, and are you doing so? Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I consider really decarbonisation the same way that we consider safety. Collaborate with competitors. I'm delighted here this collaboration. Sorry, the other part of your question was collaboration. How are we? Yes. Yesterday we were at other events. Other airlines. UK, we were together. Like airlines joined that. We want to work together. Challenge.
Just about it's an area that the UK is leading earlier production system. Airlines, other major businesses, maybe many of them are competitors and we've signed up to the net zero 2050 sometime before national level. So I think we're already seeing it happen in Angus, but I think there is opportunity for more collaboration to take place, and I think it would be essential.
It feels to me that we talked about the level playing field earlier, and to create that level playing field, you're going to have your competitors. Agreeing what that. Well, I come to you, I've had one hand at the back, it's gone off 3 times.
Hi, it's Stuart Murray from Earls. It was a clarification technology side. Is there an interest?
To possibly specify there will also be so definitely very right now situation.
No, I think the fuel cell combustion is really interesting. You know, we have another partnership with Airbus with electric who start up electric. And the reason why we continue that partnership batteries very, very high power. Hybrid combustion, plus you've got some Safran published a new open rotor design, which was a high electric that side 2 megawatt.
Hi, my question's for David, who I can't actually see. Bethany Hall from Fly Zero here. So my question's about, in your roadmap, you mentioned about decommissioning of your legacy fleet. And at Fly Zero, we're doing lots of stuff to think about the whole design for sustainability, circular economy. So how does the accountability sit in terms of thinking about the emissions associated with decommissioning the old air? That's something you're thinking about.
Thanks, Bethany, for that question. So, firstly, I have to congratulate Bethany and her colleagues in Fly Zero. They've done a really brilliant job over the last 12 months. They've got a sprint to look for zero emissions designs and have recently published some prototypes of what they think a zero emissions aircraft will look like. And their sort of flagship one, which they have a great model of, is a narrow body hydrogen aircraft. So well done, Fly Zero, for coming up with what I think is a brilliant first design. Yeah, in terms of decommissioning aircraft, it's a difficult one, and it's not my area of expertise, but it does need to be looked at in the whole chain of things, because clearly we have a lot of aircraft, even right now. Easyjet owns over 300 aircraft, and one of those older aircraft have to be replaced by modern aircraft, kerosene burning aircraft. But at some point, they're all going to be decommissioned and replaced by hydrogen aircraft. So, what do you do with all of those? I don't think it's a problem that we have got anywhere near solving yet. Definitely something to look at. But I'm sorry, I don't know much detail.
I really want to the whole panel. I'm wondering, multi-year transport day yesterday.
We need to tell our story a little bit better. We're not great at doing that sometimes, and I think that there's still lack of knowledge by politicians who are sometimes stunned talking about hydrogen. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was no idea at all. Definitely get to tell our story. Slowly getting there, but
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of that cross-transit side, I mean, we have a program to put a only cracking unit with sandbox right now. But we just heard today, right, it's one of the Australian programs. Same unit going to rail, the rail. How that gave as far as
Is at the point from my perspective, the urgency of that storytelling team, because we see the future demand for to make green hydrogen, we will have to have our place in that supply as we come of consumers, especially during that phase. So I agree, we have to tell our story and or ask the policy questions to those who can to prioritise the energy.
I was going to say, well, but becoming increasingly apparent, the sort of complexity sorts of ecosystem uses the right thing for the right thing. And I think we touched on it in our previous debate around the ecosystem, that
actually we need to make sure those right fuels are available for the industries that can't transition to other fuels. So it may be aviation has to become available. Maybe the rail has to be prioritised, but those debates are yet to be had.
To start.
They do, yeah.
Just to add on telling, I don't so think the green jobs, the as Southwest is, got the opportunity to be active, and it comes back to people thinking about jobs, communicate that.
Absolutely. Now we're coming up on time. Let's go for one final question there.
Hi, Alexander from Harriet Watt. So my question is kind of a three-part question. So obviously COP26 and the events around it are tackling the ethical issue of global warming. What are your companies and the industry kind of doing? Like, do you have these ethical checks when you make decisions? And how are you having those conversations? Third one is obviously being more ethical seems to be more expensive. So how are you factoring that in? Being competitive and having to put your shareholders first, but also be heavy question. I'm sorry.
I got to on the side say it's the equal transition from something that's more ethical is, as I said in the introduction, something and changing our best. I think the governance around sustainability dedicated only but to ensure that that decision help but that's absolutely
answer. I mean, being ethical is doing the right thing. Customers, in our case, offset emissions. Costs us a lot of money. So that race to zero. I do because they're there on the scene. Passenger buying a ticket, but we need to hold future leadership of the nation of account. So we're doing everything we can to put a framework in place now, which is irreversible, if you like. We take brave leadership to say, you know what, I'm going to pull out of that race to zero, and that's
Just add to that to say, we've all got an ethical role to play in driving the energy transition, but now we're also starting to see measures come into force that can actually be audited to make sure we're progressing and delivering on our goals. So, within Wood, we've stated a target to decarbonise our Scope 1 and 2 emissions 40% by 2030 on our own pathway to net zero. We also comply with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is an auditable measure that's being adopted by the G7 and ruled out. And there's also going to be a task force for natural-related climate financial disclosures as well, looking at the impact that organisations like ourselves have on the natural environment and biodiversity. So we're starting to see those ethical challenges now built into metrics which can actually be measured and audited against to make sure that we are delivering our goals.
Thank you, and great questions. I'm going to wrap this up now, but thank you ever so much to all of our panelists. It's been fantastic to hear from you. I think we've got a few minutes to grab coffee, so let's do that, and thank you for everyone for attending.